Mr. President, if I may just make of record my explanation of vote. Thank you, Mr. President. Today, the 19th Congress missed an opportunity to show its independence. We failed to demonstrate that we do hold the power of the purse. Mr. President, nagpapasalamat po ako sa mataas na Kamara at sa chairperson ng ating Senate Committee on Finance. Salamat po for accepting my amendment in the Senate to realign confidential and intelligence funds in DepEd to specific programs in the department. Ngunit ako'y nalulungkot sa sinapit sa BICAM na ito ay muling ibinalik. Tila naging mapurol at pudpod ang proteksyong binigay sa pondo ng bayan by granting in full all the requests for confidential and intelligence funds under the Marcos Duterte administration. And worse, the legislature agreed to remove provisions that require congressional reporting of the utilization plan and disbursement of the confidential and intelligence fund. In the absence of such provisions, in spite of the Select Oversight Committee on Confidential and Intelligence Funds, how can we be expected to exercise checks and balances? At kung hindi natin makumbinse ang mga kasamahan sa House sa napagkaisahan natin sa Senado, how can we ensure transparency and accountability? Nakapanghihinayang po na sa unang budget ng administrasyon, Congress has shown its malleability to the whims of the administration and has squandered an opportunity offered by the Senate for more transparency and accountability and less opportunities for corruption. Effectively, Congress has abdicated its power of the purse to holders of civilian offices and departments in the executive, setting a precedent for improper budget requests leading up to the elections in 2028. On account of the full restoration of the confidential and intelligence funds, as well as the removal of safeguards on the proper use of the CIFs, I regret, Mr. President, dear colleagues, that I am constrained to vote no to the Bicameral Conference Committee report. Salamat po, Mr. President.
Because the House budget is around 34.9, the Senate version is 35.7, and the final is 30.8 billion. So there was a consensus between the two houses to increase the budget for CHED, and yet at the BICAM level, bumaba na lang po. We decided to cut, as stated by our chairman, tulong-dunong and TES.
Yes, Your Honor. These were not our amendments to begin with. These were amendments made at the GAB level, Your Honor, the House level, which were reprioritized.
Yes, but the Senate added 825.
Yes, that's left untouched, Your Honor.
That's
left
okay. So we were able to protect our version, Mr. President.
Yes, Your Honor.
And then, Mr. President, on the budgetary support to government corporations under the Department of Agriculture, we also noticed that the Philippine Fisheries Development Authority, with a GAB budget of 5.16 billion,
Yan ba yung ano?
was reduced to 2.46, or a cut of 2.7 billion pesos, Mr. President.
Hindi, kung realign, hindi dapat menos. Okay. And what is the 1.5? Hindi, pero the FM. Ano yung realignment? There is a 1.2 billion item, Your Honor, of the 2.7 total decrease, 1.2 has been realigned to the Office of the Secretary of the DA, whereas 1.5 is an outright cut, Your Honor.
Sige. So mukhang sa BICAM na rin na pag-isipan po yun kasi I think we left the gap untouched here in the Senate version. So,
Yes, Your Honor.
so
Yes.
The problem, Mr. President, is I'm looking at the Office of the Secretary's budget of the DA. The BICAM's proposal is the net change is less 2.1 billion pesos, Mr. President. So I heard that earlier that the cut in the
What's the total?
Philippine Fisheries Development Authority, 1.2 was transferred to the Office of the Secretary, and yet the Office of the Secretary of the DA will suffer a 2.1 billion cut in the BICAM report. Mr.
That's correct, Your Honor. We also... Naglipat tayo sa program. Naglipat tayo. Ha? Yeah, binaba natin. We put some items in the unprogrammed, Your Honor. The foreign assisted. There is a foreign assisted program there. That's we put in the unprogrammed also.
So thank you for that, Mr. President. So parang, although we added 1.2 ba
It's
ito?
item 13 in the list we gave you under the special provisions, the support to FAPs or foreign assisted projects, Your Honor.
Item 13 would be second additional financing for Philippine
Rural Development Project. Yes, Your Honor. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Akala ko we were punishing the Philippine Fisheries Development Authority for the unexplained brouhaha over the banning of salmon and pampano. Pero
Not connected, Your Honor.
correct.
Not connected.
And we will be punishing the wrong agency because I think that is BIPAR. And I think the status of that issue, Mr. President, is BIPAR has withdrawn the said order, no, or the threat to confiscate the pampano.
I believe so. I read
and
that in
so-
the. I read it online also.
So
Your Honor.
congratulations to the Senate and of course to Senator Tulfo who started our discussion on that subject matter.
And Senator Grace Poe as well.
Yes, Senator Grace po. And the Senate President is also taking a stand on the issue because we did not. And then, Mr. President, ito na lang po isa rin pong parang ito talaga mahirap na siguro maintindihan yung Department of Health natin on the special purpose funds, budgetary support to government corporations. The BICAM report is 1 billion lower than the Senate version, Mr. President.
Yes, Your Honor. It's the BICAM report puts 209.6 billion, which is lower than the Senate version of 221.7 billion, but still higher than the NEP, either the NEP, which is 191.2 billion, as well as this year's budget, which is 183.8 billion, Your Honor.
Mr. President, I was referring to the special purpose funds, budgetary support to government corporations of the Lung Center, NKTI, Philippine Children's Medical Center, PhilHealth, Philippine
I'm sorry, Your
Heart
Honor.
Center.
There's a decrease there of
1 billion.
around a billion from the Senate version. So from 107.1 billion to 107.1 billion rather from 108.1 billion. But again, this is still higher than the NEP level of 105.2 billion and the 2022 GAA of 85 billion. So still taken together a significant increase of around 22 billion from this year's budget, Your Honor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Pero one concern, Mr. President, is the budget for the subsidy to the small business corporation, because even in the president's message, I think he said that he's committed to supporting MSMEs, and one form of support is the small business corporations financing programs for micro and small entities, Mr. President. Ang ginawa po natin, kinalahati po natin yung 1.5 billion pesos, which is a subsidy, ang ending po sa BICAM, 750 million pesos, Mr. President.
Yes, we confirm that, Your Honor.
Are we not being inconsistent now with the President's desire to help the MSMEs, and one mechanism is through financing, Mr. President, microfinancing?
Well, we added to the DTI in some of the ancillary programs. I think His Honor was one of those who moved for the additions outside of putting aside the issue of the small business corporation. I think you, ano yung sa amendments ni Minority Leader? So the shared services facilities,
Yes.
the Malikhaing Pinoy.
Yes, Mr. President.
And one more program.
Is there an issue with the small business corporation?
Well, I think in a perfect world, we would have wanted to
they-
maintain or increase that. But I think they still have funds, Your Honor,
Ayun.
even carried over from the bayanihan. And in fact, hindi lahat na disbursed yun, if I'm not mistaken. No?
Yes, kasi Attorney Reid, Mr. President, additional yata sa loan
Opo. It's a
portfolio. nila.
revolving fund naman ho. So, hanggang maubos ho yun, pinapalitan naman ho natin. So,
Thank you, Mr. President. As we all know, the budget law is not only about amounts. It has also some special provisions governing the access to the use of the amounts mentioned in the budget, Mr. President. So, I have been informed, Mr. President, that the confidential and intelligence funds amendments that we have made have not all been sustained at the BICAM level, or have some of them been sustained in the BICAM level, Mr. President?
unfortunately not, Your Honor. We tried to convince our counterparts to adopt our versions, which were authored by His Honor and Deputy Minority Leader HONTIVEROS, but the House was adamant that they wanted to return the fund to the DepEd as originally envisioned under the National Expenditure Program, Your Honor.
Yes, Mr. President, but during the Senate plenary, a table was presented to us. There was a total cut of 152,668,000. So, wala pong na-retain po rito sa cut.
Meron
natin.
po, meron po. Yung sa ibang ahensya na nakat, hindi na po, pinabayaan na po, they respected those cuts yun. Yung
Yes.
DepEd lang po yung, so there, of the 187.6 billion, or million rather, 187.6 million, which the Senate realigned upon your initiative, and the committee's initiative, and Senator Riza's initiative. We realigned the 187.6 million, 120 of which was from the DepEd. So, because the House wanted to return the 120 to the DepEd, that was returned, but they respected the Senate realignment of 67.6 million, Your Honor, over a number of agencies, the DFA, the DOJ, the DSWD, and other executive offices like the ERC, the OPAP, and the Ombudsman, Your Honor.
So, thank you for that information, Mr. President. So, ang ibig sabihin po na pagdating po sa confidential and intelligence funds, yung dalawang ahensya na gustong mag-umpisa ng practice, which is the Office of the Vice President at 500 million pesos and the Office of the Secretary of the Department of Education at 150 million pesos, ay matutuloy po itong plano nila na mag-umpisa na ng practice na ito na meron ng CIF yung ahensya po nila.
Well, hindi naman umpisa ho kasi na I think it was already stated for the record dati ho, Your Honor, Mr. President, na meron silang intelligence funds at some point in time. But I guess it's more of a revival of this practice in the case of the DepEd and the OVP, Your Honor.
I think, Mr. President, during our committee hearings and subcommittee hearings and the plenary, we established that the OVP was once upon a time. But I don't think the DepEd, I don't think it was established that the DepEd once upon a time was ever granted the CIF. The OVP, once upon a time, maybe a maximum amount of 5 to 6 million pesos, Mr. President. Not in the magnitude of 500 million pesos, Mr.
Yes,
President.
we confirm that, Your Honor. But both agencies had smaller amounts at some point. Yes, Your Honor.
Okay,
But yes,
thank you.
the point of the minority leader is well taken.
Thank you for that correction, because it was never mentioned before that the DepEd had once upon a time. But it has happened pala. Okay. But, Mr. President, as I stated earlier, the budget law is not all about amounts, but also there are special provisions, general provisions, special provisions. May we know what happened to the special provision and general provisions introduced by the minority, which the chairman accepted, and the body accepted in the Senate version, where we asked for the front end, ano tawag doon? The front end, hindi, ganun tawag ulit, pagbantay, front end requirement for more transparency, which was called the work plan by Senator Riza HONTIVEROS, and then we expanded the requirement for the work plan not only to the DepEd but to all of the agencies getting CIF. And then another provision was the submission of quarterly reports, accomplishment reports, not liquidation reports, not only to the Office of the President, but to both houses of Congress, covering both confidential and intelligence funds. May we know the status of these provisions, Mr. President?
Yes, Your Honor. These were not retained by the bicameral upon the insistence of the House for the following reasons. In the 2021 GAA, the President vetoed a similar provision for the submission of quarterly accomplishment reports to both houses of Congress. And the veto noted that the veto message emphasized the duty of the President, the protection of national security, and the maintenance of public safety. Thus, all activities and reports involving intelligence gathering that have a direct impact on national security and public safety shall only be reported directly to the President. The veto message also notes that intelligence funds covers programs, projects, and activities related to national security. In this regard, matters relating to national security are deemed confidential or classified information, which is one of the recognized exceptions to the right to information. And in the case of Senate versus Ermita in 2006, the Supreme Court ruled that our jurisdiction recognizes the common law holding that there is a government privilege against public disclosure with respect to state secrets regarding military, diplomatic, and other national security matters. That is the one reason with respect to the intelligence fund. And with respect to the confidential fund, the reason given for the non-adoption of the Senate amendment was, this is regarding the submission of a work plan, Your Honor, is because there is already a COA DBM joint circular number 2015-01, which already provides explicit guidelines as to the reporting of the use of confidential and intelligence funds. And here, all heads of the agencies of national government agencies, local government units, and GOCCs, which released confidential funds and or intelligence funds, should submit quarterly accomplishment reports to the President. This is for the national government agencies, to the GCG, for the GOCCs, and to the DILG Secretary for the LGUs. And moreover, the additional submission of a work plan was deemed redundant as the joint circular already requires a physical and financial plan or the plan approved by the head of agency indicating the proposed amount allocated for each program, activity, and project where disbursements pertaining to confidential expenses and intelligence expenses shall be based. And the physical and financial plan is submitted as follows. Upon approval of the GAA, the head of agency of the department submits to the DBM a special budget request, and the DBM endorses to the special budget request or SBR to the OP or the Office of the President for approval. And this includes the IF allocation for the project purpose under the agency-specific budget in the GAA and reflected in the fiscal and financial plan. And for the confidential fund of GOCCs, before any GOCC can allocate CFs or confidential funds in its corporate operating budget, it must first obtain clearance from the GCG to justify the provision of confidential funds in its corporate operating budget. And as for LGUs, only when there is a request for additional confidential funds, the fiscal and financial plans for both the original allocation and the additional request shall be submitted to the concerned DILG field officer. And common to all agencies, whether national government agencies, GOCCs, and local government units, is a fiscal and financial plan as one of the documents required to support the disbursement voucher for the grant of cash advances for confidential funds and intelligence funds, common to all the above-mentioned agencies. And moreover, the fiscal and financial plan is one of the documentary requirements to support the liquidation of CF and IF, or confidential fund and intelligence fund, cash advances, Your Honor. So in short, the House said that these reports would be a duplication of what is already being done with respect to COA, and they deemed that sufficient a safeguard, Your Honor.
Mr. President, the rule in the current 2022 GAA, okay, is that for intelligence funds, still, accomplishment reports must be submitted quarterly, but only to the Office of the President. Is that correct, Mr. President?
Yes, Your Honor.
And are we retaining that in the 2023 budget?
Yes, Your Honor.
So that's the main.
Yes, Your Honor.
In that, and for the confidential fund, still accomplishment reports must be submitted quarterly to the Office of the President and to both houses of Congress.
Yes,
That's-
Your Honor.
That's the rule in 2022. Will that be carried over to 2023?
Still there, Your Honor.
Okay,
That is
so-
still there, Your Honor.
Okay, so in effect, it was the presidential veto which we are going to follow, Mr. President. So, but for the record, Congress wanted in the 2022 GAA, because it passed both houses, wanted the intelligence funds to be covered by or reported through accomplishment reports, not only to the Office of the President, but to both houses of Congress, except that it was vetoed.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Pero the veto, I think, is not part of the law of the land. I mean, the successor president is not bound by the veto of his predecessor president. So I think the safer approach would have been to include that in the GAA, and let's find out if the new president, the incumbent president, will also exercise his presidential veto power, Mr. President. Well, anyway, that's my position. Mr.
There is reason to the argument of the minority leader, Your Honor.
maglalagay tayo sa special provision ng Senate rule, di ba? Sabi niya okay lang. Opo, sir. Anong i-check lang sa kung wala yung...
Mr. President, we have established a Senate Select Oversight Committee over confidential and intelligence funds. So, what do we hope to achieve, Mr. President? Or what can we do? What reports can we examine if we do not insist on receiving some reports concerning intelligence funds, Mr. President?
The quarterly reports to be submitted to both houses of Congress, Your Honor, can be scrutinized, I believe, by that committee, Your Honor.
But that would be confidential funds, Mr. President.
Yes, Your Honor.
So our Select Oversight Committee will have to maintain a hands-off position over intelligence funds, because we even if we want to examine them, there are no submissions, Mr. President.
Hindi kasama, so it's not part of the oversight. We're just checking on the jurisdiction of the committee, Your Honor. It's my first time to be appointed to that committee, but perhaps His Honor was a Senate President at one point. Maybe he knows what was actually transpired in those committee meetings. But we're just checking out.
And then we passed, Mr. President, we passed it in this Congress while the version of the GAB required the submission even of intelligence funds accomplishment reports to both houses of Congress. Yun eh. So we might have actually weakened the jurisdiction and the powers of that Senate Select Oversight Committee, Mr. President. So just for the information of everybody, because ito yung nangyari eh, na
Yeah, it is under the mandate of the Oversight Committee, Your Honor. It is this is Senate Resolution 302, which we passed last November 21. It is tasked with oversight functions over the use, disbursement, and expenditures of both confidential intelligence funds granted to certain government agencies, and to provide legislative oversight over the conduct of intelligence activities, sources, methods, and programs. So both are covered, Your Honor, under this under the resolution we passed, Your Honor.
Yes, Mr. President. So just to for the information of our colleagues, we have such a committee, and yet sa final version of the GAA, agencies receiving intelligence funds need not submit periodic accomplishment reports to both houses of Congress because we agreed to they just need to submit to the office of the President. So parang pinilayan natin mismo yung ating sariling committee, maging ang jurisdiction niya, doon na lang po sa confidential funds ang mangyayari, Mr. President.
Well, reading them together, I don't think there's anything which prevents the Oversight Committee, Your Honor, from requiring the submission of reports with respect to both confidential and intelligence funds, because there's no prohibition in any law, and it's inherent in our oversight. As long as perhaps we do it in a executive session, then I think there is still it's still what's the word I'm searching for? Hindi naman 100% sure na hindi natin pwedeng tingnan po yun. Opo.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will, when that committee is convened, and I think I'm a member of that committee.
Yes,
so,
you are, Your Honor.
So if the chair, I will join the chairman's, Mr. President, chairman's argument that this is the inherent power of the committee to even if it's not required, even if the submission is not required in the GAA, our committee has the power to ask for copies of accomplishment reports, even of intelligence funds, Mr. President. So thank you for that opinion expressed by our chairman. Mr. President, last 2 points na lang po. Ito po, nagulat lang po ako kasi what my staff did was to compare our Senate version we passed here, second and third, with the BICAM report. And I looked at the budget for the Congress of the Philippines, and I see a new figure here. In the budget of the House of Representatives, there's an increase of 12,042,456,000. And since this figure made it into the BICAM report, making the House of Representatives budget 28 billion pesos, I'm assuming that they explained, the House panel explained to the Senate panel why the House needs such
Yes, Your Honor.
a tremendous increase in their budget, almost doubling their budget, Mr. President.
Yes, Your Honor. There are a number of items which they gave. First is the buildings. Second is vehicle acquisitions. Third is the PS or personal services requirements of the new members. And fourth is the operational requirements of additional members of Congress, including their district staff, Your Honor.
So there are details, Mr. President. Siguro the bulk of this would be buildings. Imposible sigurong sa sweldo to or ano. So may we ask for a copy, Mr.
Yes, Your
President,
Honor.
of what the House
This is
panel...
actually, yes, we'll furnish his representation, Your Honor. His honor will furnish his
That's,
honor.
I know this is a House amendment kasi wala naman to sa Senate version actually.
Opo.
So, opo. Now, Mr. President, On my last point, Mr. President, my staff and I added all of the budgets of the education sector. Department of Education, 678.3 billion. State universities and colleges, 107 billion. I'm rounding off, Mr. President. Commission on Higher Education, 30.8 billion pesos. TESDA, 16 billion pesos. And if we total it, it's around 832.2 billion pesos. We could say that this is the budget of the education sector. And then we looked at the budget for the DPWH in the BICAM report, Mr. President. The total allocation for the DPWH is 893.1 billion pesos. And comparing the infrastructure budget, 893, let's round off, 893 billion pesos, to the education sector budget of 832 billion pesos, we see that the infrastructure budget is 60 billion pesos more than the total allocation for the education sector, which got us worried, Mr. President, because Article 14, Section 5, Paragraph 5 of the 1987 Constitution provides that the state shall assign the highest budget priority to education and ensure that teaching will attract and retain its rightful share of the best available talents through adequate remuneration and other means of job satisfaction and fulfillment. So, in effect, the focus should be on the first part of the provision. The state shall assign the highest budget priority to education. And given these figures, Mr. President, are we not violating the said constitutional provision, Mr. President? Because the 2023 version of the BICAM gives highest budget allocation to infrastructure, public works infrastructure, Mr. President.
Yeah, that's a great question, Your Honor, Mr. President. But I'll answer it on two levels, Your Honor. The first is the factual level. And in fact, because the distinguished minority leader only mentioned the DepEd, the CHED, and the SUCS, and the TESDA. But I would add to that the National Maritime Polytechnic, which has a budget of 121, rounding off 121 million. The PNPA, or the Philippine National Police Academy, which has a budget of 1.476 million. The Philippine Public Safety College, which has a budget of 727.7 million. The National Defense College of the Philippines, with a budget of 126 million approximately. The Philippine Military Academy, with 1.47 million. Billion pala to. Hindi million. Billion. I'm sorry, that's billion. No? I mentioned millions. Sorry, those are billions, Your Honor. And the Philippine Science High School with 376.7 million. And the DOST Science Education Institute with a budget of 7.089 billion. As well as the education infrastructure budget, meaning to classrooms, etc. That's also counted under education. There's an 8.5 billion. So if we add all of those to the budgets of DepEd, 121.7, CHED, 331.7, SUCS, 111.4, TESDA, 16B, that gives us a figure of 900.9 billion approximately, Your Honor, which is higher than the DPWH budget of around 890 billion or so. Slightly higher, Your Honor. So that's the first level on the factual level. And on the legal level, Your Honor, that question has been posted in a Supreme Court case of Gingona versus Carage, where similar facts obtained, except that there, the budget for other agencies, I think, or the DepEd was not given the highest budgetary priority. And the court said that the constitutional provision mandating Congress to assign the highest budgetary priority to education does not mean that the hands of Congress are so hamstrung as to deprive it of the power to respond to the imperatives of the national interest and for the attainment of other state policies or objectives. So may kaso po yan na So that's the second level, Your Honor, the constitutional or the legal level na sinabi po ng Korte Suprema na kahit hindi po highest budget po yung DepEd, which is not the case in our 2023 budget anyway. Hindi naman po strictly enforced po yun. Kumbaga, I guess, in legal speak or lawyer talk, it would not be a self-executory provision, Your Honor, but just more of a constitutional injunction or constitutional policy, Your Honor.
Yes, Mr. President, from my point of view, that is actually a mandate, a directive to Congress that we should prioritize. That's a safeguard it. We have to prioritize education in the budget. So that's my position. And then even the interpretation of the executive branch, Mr. President, because this is I will now read the President's budget message. The following are the priority sectors in our agenda for prosperity. This is found on page 12, Mr. President. The education sector will receive the highest allocation with 852.8 billion pesos. This consists of the allocations for the Department of Education, state universities and colleges, Commission on Higher Education, and Technical Education and Skills Development Authority. While this is consistent with the constitutional mandate to assign the highest budget priority to education, it also reflects my commitment to invest in human capital development and empower the youth. So from the point of view of the executive branch, the President, who crafted the budget and initiated the budget process, the education sector consists of DepEd, SUCs, CHED, and TESDA. And he refers to the constitutional mandate to assign the highest budget priority to education. So I believe, Mr. President, that the President of the Republic of the Philippines seems to agree with this representation's interpretation, Mr. President, that the constitutional provision is a mandate or directive, and the education sector should be those agencies devoted to educating our people. So even if we concede na isama na natin si PMA, Maritime, Police Academy, Public Safety College, Philippine Science High School, National Defense College, DOST Science, Science Education, hindi pa yata abot ng 60 billion po yan. That's the difference between And then because we have to contest the inclusion of the education infra. Kasi if these are classrooms, tandaan natin, ang classrooms natin are also used for evacuation center. They are also used as voting center. So let's siguro when the Constitution directs us to give the highest budget priority to education, it means educating our people, the actual expenditure for educating our people. Infra is infra. Education is about teaching, educating our people. At any rate, Mr. President, this is my position and my interpretation, but I would like to request for a copy of the list of the other agencies and their allocations included by our chairman in
Yes, Your Honor.
computing
We will furnish, Your Honor.
the budget given to the education sector.
Yes, Your Honor.
Because the President's budget message on page 13 continues as follows. Public Works will receive 718.4 billion pesos to continue the build, etc. So, kinumpare po niya just to really show that the education budget is more than the public works or infra budget. Ganun po ang flow sa President's budget. So, if we follow the President's message and but now cite the updated figures, we will now see that the education sector is 60 billion pesos short or lower than the infrastructure or the public works budget, Mr. President.
Well, we respect the minority leader's opinion, but traditionally we've always included these other, even before that president's budget message, we've always included these educational institutions, the National Maritime, the Police Academy, the Public Safety College, the National Defense College,
PMA.
Philippine Science Education Institute, as part of the education budget, Your Honor.
PMA, even the PMA, sir, you mentioned.
Yes, Your Honor, PMA.
What would be the total of those mentioned, Mr. President?
Uh,
Will they total 60 billion?
no, Your Honor, they would total around
They will not.
2, 4, about 20 billion, Your Honor, roughly.
Yes, that's correct,
Yeah.
Mr. President. They will not total 60 billion. That is the anong tawag mo doon?
But under the BICAM, Your Honor, the DepEd also went from, got an increase of 11 billion from the NEP. And the CHED got an increase of 1 billion from the NEP. At the BICAM, the SUKS got around 14 billion increase. And the TESDA got around a 2.3 billion increase. So those figures taken together total 900.9 billion, Your Honor. The increased or enhanced budgets of the DepEd, the CHED, the SUKS, the TESDA, combined with the 20 billion mentioned earlier, would amount to roughly a total of 900.9 billion, Your Honor.
Mr. President, I prefaced my question with citing the figures precisely for DepEd, SUCs, CHED, and TESDA based on amounts found in the BICAM report, Mr. President. And the total would be 832.2 billion pesos. That's why we made this observation, because if this were wrong, we would not make the observation, Mr. President, that infra public works budget allocation is higher than education budget allocation, Mr. President. In short, Mr. President, I got my figures from the BICAM report. Unless the BICAM reports figures contain some errors, Mr. President. Check nyo nga. Ilang beses nyo na inad to. Add yun na.
Ano yung difference? What is the difference na? What are you? Pero still nagagastos sa ano?
678.3. Ayan.
Yes, Your Honor. The figure you cited was explained to me. It represents new appropriations. There are figures which are what are they? Automatic appropriations, which also go towards education, like the teacher's retirement. That's considered that's also or booked under ILIP. That's also considered an expenditure for education, Your Honor.
Sa DPWH.
So yung mga items na ganon are, you use the figure for new appropriations,
Correct,
but there are
correct.
actually figures which are automatically appropriated under other laws. And those also are considered education expenditures, Your Honor.
So can the LBRMO
We'll furnish you a comprehensive...
guide us,
Yes, Your Honor.
But this time also including to compare oranges with oranges, to also include the automatic appropriations in the infra sector.
Yes, Your Honor.
Kasi para makita po
Yes,
natin
yes.
lahat.
The third term is it's obligations-based, Your Honor.
Yes,
So what is actually obligated, which is new appropriations plus automatic
Yes,
appropriations,
yes,
Your
Mr.
Honor.
President. So just
Apples to apples, I understand the point of Your Honor.
So,
Yeah.
thank you for that clarification, but we have yet to see it, Mr. President, because we will have to also make our own computations. But if we do not look at the automatic appropriations, at least we have established that it is a fact that if we do not consider the automatic appropriations, using the discretion of Congress in appropriating funds, we have appropriated more funds for public works than education, Mr. President.
Well, I guess that depends on where you want to draw the boundaries, Your Honor. But from what we see, from our point of view, the BICAM figure for education is 7 billion? 7 billion, approximately 7 billion pesos higher than the infrastructure budget, Your Honor.
After adding the maritime, PNPA...
Opo.
Sige.
Opo.
Pati yung study na lang po na yun, hingi na rin po
Yes,
kami
yes, Your
ng
Honor.
kopya,
Yes.
Mr. President.
Yes, Your
But at any rate, that is our understanding as of the moment. That's the product of our research. And we are worried about compliance with the constitutional mandate. It's not only a constitutional provision, but a mandate to give education the highest budget priority, Mr. President. So, wala na. So with that, Mr. President, I think I have asked all the questions I want to ask because this is the BICAM report. So, ngayon lang din naman natin yata nakita ito. So, I'm sorry that we had to ask and consume a lot of your time, Mr. Chairman. No? We had to ask a lot of questions to get the details. So thank you for your patience, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for guiding us about on how to understand the final form of the budget that the bicameral conference committee has approved, Mr. Chairman.
Well, we thank the good minority leader for his usual thorough and very well prepared interpellations. Truly, it's a challenge to answer all of his questions, whether it's legal or financial or fiscal. And we thank him for, he and the deputy minority leader for performing their roles very well.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that we ratify the Bicameral Conference Committee report on the disagreeing votes of House Bill number 4488 and let the text of the joint explanation be inserted into the record of the Chamber. So move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion, the Perennial Appropriations Act, the Bicameral Conference Committee report of the General Appropriations, the disagreeing provisions of the General Appropriations Act for 2023 is hereby ratified.
Make of record my no vote to the Bicameral Conference Committee report, and the explanation can be found in the interpellation that I just that we just underwent, Mr. President. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
President, I just want to say a short word of thanks to you, to our majority leader, our Senate President, our minority leader, all the vice chairpersons, and all of our colleagues, and to our Senate staff. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you. I'd just like to put on record, ladies and gentlemen, that we still do have the Oversight Committee on the confidential funds. I would like to really reiterate to our distinguished colleagues that are members of that committee, we will look at how they will spend these funds. I assure our minority leader and deputy minority leader, of which the minority leader is a part of, that we will scrutinize and make sure that the funds are well spent, and so that the next years, as Senator, our minority leader, Senator Pimentel had said, this year we watch, we wait, we get them accountable for the funds, and next year we can do the budget deliberation once again, armed with that knowledge, if that was really, truly well spent for the Filipino people. But I'd like to also thank our colleagues, but most especially the Secretariat, who labored very hard for 2 weeks to be able to pass this measure. And of course, our majority floor leader, for a job well done shepherding this to the floor.